Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us again. My name is Dan Kosaki. I'm Vice President for Mission and Ministry here. And Ryan Sheehan is with us as well. And just like last time, we'll look forward to moderating the discussion, but just as we did last time, very, very informal. But as always, we'll kick things off with a simple prayer. Good and gracious God, we come before you tonight with thanksgiving for the work and ministry and writing of Father Gregory Boyle. Moreover, we're thankful for this community, which gathers across many miles, but which has as its common denominator the University of Scranton, and a love for that university, which seeks above all to do your will and give greater honor and glory to your name. We ask you to be with us during our discussion tonight and be with all of our friends and family as we enter into the holiday season. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Last time I promised one of our participants that I would post in the chat the prompts that we had prepared for our discussion. This way it's, easily at our fingertips. So I'll do that now. I just put it in the chat, so hopefully you're able to see that. That's only just a very basic guide. We don't have to follow it. We might refer to it here and there, but if our conversation takes us in a different direction entirely, that's great too. So I guess I'll just open it up to anybody who wants to jump in first. You feel free either to respond to one of those three prompts or anything else that stuck out to you from the text.
We have Marie and Judy are already. Go ahead, Marie, and then we'll go to you, Judy, right afterwards.
I found it very interesting that all through the book, both the first half that we read and the second, Father Boyle leaves strands of just concepts to think about. So noted specifically when the homie cut the cord of his child and said, "And life begins." And then when Father Boyle was at the wedding and he, I guess at a wedding, and he answered a question about same-sex marriage. He discusses celibacy. He talks about being in New York the day after the 2020 election, national election. And I think there was another one, but anyway, he's leaving these strands. And then in chapter 6, I think it's very important what he says about the church and fitting in with his concept of inclusion. So I'm on page 131 in the book, and he says, it's the first paragraph. The fruit of each of such compassionate curiosity is that the fear, for example, that there won't be enough priests gets transformed into bravery. It asserts instead that there are plenty of priests out there if we are willing to ordain them. It guides us to enhance the lives of couples so fully that they don't terminate their pregnancies. We don't see gay marriage as a threat to anything, but rather an honoring of Jesus and science. And I suspect that we will feel less threatened in our religious liberty the more concretely we live authentically Christian lives. We trade in sadness and fear for joy and bravery, the whole language. And then on the bottom of that page, he compares about the wine and the wineskins, and he says, The antidote to the world's exclusions is to be anchored in a transcendented inclusion. We don't want to keep anything out, be defensive, and enclose our hearts. New wine, old wine, the wineskins to match. The old wine is cosmetic piety, and the new is real discipleship. And for me, that was the most important part of the book.
Thank you very much. Judy, did you have your hand up before?
I went back and I listened again to our Zoom, and I realized that what is so significant for me about Father Boyle is that he's able to do this. And I have compassion reading about these kids and what they've lived with. And it's like, yeah, understand them and love them. And then I thought about something Ryan had said, which was, well, these are extreme examples. And it made me think that, what about just in my own little world? How about if I give people slack right in my family and am not so quick to take their words at face value, but try to think of, where are they coming from? What have they had in their life that I may not know about? And so I think that's what it's so remarkable. And that's why I see what he's doing as being a modern day Jesus. It's miraculous. It's miraculous that he hasn't been shot, and that, somebody can say to him, I'm sure he hears it every day, expletive, your bridge. And he tries to compose himself and pray in that moment and ask the Spirit to help him. And I think it makes me want to do that in my small world. I'm not affected by gangs, but I'd like to put myself in others' shoes more often.
Thank you both. It's just, it's so fascinating, and maybe I'll just reply to Judy's comment first. St. Ignatius has early on in the spiritual exercises, this basically it's a principle. A lot of people call it the Ignatian plus. The principle is to always give the benefit of the doubt to your interlocutor, whoever that may be. So I think, Judy, you spoke so eloquently to that here, and it's a reminder that that's the spiritual tradition that Boyle is coming out of. And then to Marie's point, and in a lot of ways, Marie, you were sort of beginning to touch on the prompt that we had on the second prompt, where we were asking specifically about chapter 6. The thing that just really turned me on to chapter 6 so immediately was, in all three of Boyle's books, he's really sort of hinting at what his ecclesiology or his study of his understanding of the church is, but he really does a deep dive in chapter 6, which he hasn't done as certainly as explicitly in any of the other chapters in the other books. So I thank you for calling our attention to that. I hope we can chat more about that as well, but thanks to both of you. John, please.
I think in our last session, Joseph, you were the one who asked the question about evil and how we were supposed to respond to evil. And it intrigues me because it seems almost as though Father Boyle's response is markedly different from the Catholic response that I'm familiar with. And I'll admit that there may be a lot of ignorance on my part, but the Catholicism that I grew up with or know is very judgmental. And Father Gregory's response is not judgmental. It's very accepting and embracing. And for the last couple of weeks, as I was reading, I kept trying to play off that question about evil and the specific examples of multiple, mass shootings and things of that sort, especially in the light of the most recent one at the University of Virginia and then out west. And I have to say that I want to throw my lot in with Father Boyle here, that I think he's got a key, but I'm not sure how he jibes with the Jesuit hierarchy or Roman Catholicism in the larger sense.
Thank you very much for that, John. A lot of what you were saying there, and I was thinking about a little bit of what Jack was talking about last time, and thinking about, there's so much here that with which I agree. So, if you take a look at page 143, John's point about how this jibes with the hierarchy or the sort of the doctrinal teaching in the church today. Boyle makes this point in the second line of 143. Pope Francis warns of the temptation of rigidity, and he's absolutely right about that. But there's a way in which, if you get, how do I want to say this? I don't want to say too lax, but so on the very next page, for example, the bottom line of 144, you can't find a moment in the gospel where Jesus punishes, excludes, or demeans. And when you're talking about like interactions with individuals, so for example, today's gospel reading from the Catholic lectionary is a perfect example of Jesus's radical inclusion. Zacchaeus climbs the tree. Jesus says, "Wait, come down. I'm here to stay at your place. Even though I'm ad-libbing here. Even though everybody else hates you, I want to be with you." However, there is a sense in which Jesus is totally dead set against social injustice. So, I mean, when I read Jesus overturning the tables of the money changers in the temple, right, I get a different sense of him than what Boyle is putting forth on this page. And just to go back to something he said earlier in the book, I wanted to bring this up last time, but he was talking about anger, and the word he used was a useful anger, and he was talking with a homie, and I think sometimes God is angry, right? When there's social injustice taking place, when people are being excluded, right? So the opposite of what Boyle's ministry is. There's a theologian named Elizabeth Johnson who talks about God as pathos. In other words, when we are sick, or when we're sad, or when we're angry, God sort of feels those same emotions with us. And I think sometimes there is such a thing as a useful anger, not necessarily at an individual, but at social injustice, social sin, that I think Boyle could have pushed that a little bit harder. Anyway, but thank you very much, John. Other thoughts?
I appreciated his honesty when the woman made the remark to him that she was disappointed in him because he had his phone out. And I really appreciated that he came back to his own response, and he felt that he could have done that more graciously. And as somebody was saying earlier, just applying it to my own life. And that's what I've loved about this book, is applying it to my own life. I could do better. He says it's not doing better, it's knowing your own, it's loving yourself more. But I really appreciated that self-reflection, and his understanding that he could have handled that better, and that he too can get snarky when angry. Probably more at the population outside the homie population. So I just thought that was a really special piece for him to include.
Thank you very much, Eileen. I love that too. I made a note of it because, you know, so often, at least there's a temptation for me to look at Boyle as like this savior figure, which, and the more you read about him, obviously he makes it clear that that's not what this is about. This isn't about saving other people. But what comes through so clearly in that particular story is that these conversion moments are for everybody, regardless of our situation in life. That, you know, the homies go through pretty radical conversion moments and conversion stories, which Boyle tells sometimes, you know, to great hilarity. But you know, that's for all of us. I mean, that's part of the Christian life. Anyway, thank you so much. That was a great point.
The other thing that I thought could apply to me and all of us not doing work just with homies was the use of humor and playfulness. And he talked about how he makes connections. And I'm an educator, and sometimes I see children come out of the principal's office and, you know, they're laughing. And sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, did they get the point? And after reading his perspective, you know, maybe she's sending those kids out, trying to have made a connection. And after reading that chapter, I was then on a walk listening to a podcast about Ukrainian couples that are separated, and the wife is in another country and the husband's there. And the therapist that was interviewing them talked to them about the importance of playfulness and humor. And you could like see me dance in the street, because it was right after I read his exact same words. So it really touched me that's a message coming from a lot of different people, and that my own uptightness at times when I'm taking life too seriously, I'm shutting down someone's playfulness and humor, which can be a connection to me in a really deep way that I've brushed off. So I think he touches on so much that we don't need to be in his work to apply to our life.
Thank you. As he says, this again from the first half of the book on page 91, he quotes Mark Twain, "Against the assault of laughter, nothing can stand." And I mean, you know, we see as he moves on in the text.
Take her phone. She doesn't feel well, but you can bring her phone down.
Just bring your phone down then. As he moves on in the text, that when he says against the assault of laughter, nothing can stand, especially death. Right, you know, talking about death as a punk, right? Just that's a whole different way than certainly our popular culture, our society looks at death and looks at life for that matter. John, please.
Eileen's point about being in our own lives and thinking about that. So much of the book focuses on social justice issues. But on page 123, there's a lifer, I think at San Quentin, who looks out at the water from his jail cell, never expecting to be able to leave, and then finally comes to the conclusion, even if I die here, I can change here. And that notion of being able to make a radical change, whoever you are, wherever you are, was very bracing to me.
One thing that stuck out to me, I work at a college, and again, the students are very different than the homies. But when they talked about the ACEs scale and the 5 qualities that a person could have, and that the 5 qualities that their family members could have, but it did make me think of how many of our students who might have faced a high number of those things, and him saying that most of the people he works with are an 8 or higher. And when you think of not having that level of family support or foundation, it really makes you put so much else in perspective. So I had never heard of that before, and I found it really valuable.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I highlighted right away. The page, for those of you looking for it, page 105, where he talks about the adverse childhood experiences, or ACE. And to go to just pick up Kim's point even further, where, talking about the homies, but then thinking about our students, or maybe people with whom we work, or whatever, even people we see on the news who are, have a much where they fall at a much different place on the scale. So, and he marks himself as, I am a 0 on the ACEs. Well, so am I. As I was reading that paragraph, I was like, yep, right there with you. And he talks throughout the book about how he won the sibling and parent lottery. Well, I very much, I feel a lot of resonance with that. But it goes, to be able to become fluent in the whole language is to recognize that not everybody is at a 0 on the ACEs. And he, in particular, he's talking about the homies, the amount of things they had to go through in their life makes their experience so much different than mine. And that's something that, again, like you, Kim, not working with homies, but just, everyday life, just being tempted to be judgmental about other people. That's something that I just constantly trying to tell myself to slow down, try to remember that's a different reality. Thank you so much.
The other thing about that scale is it made me realize how little I knew about my students, and how little I know about my neighbors, and what they have experienced and what they're going through right now.
Marie, please.
I know it's a stretch, but I heard a priest once say that St. Luke should have been a caterer. So it's notable that in all of his books, he stresses food and being together when at eating time. My favorite part of this story, the whole book, was when they're in the restaurant in Springfield, Illinois, and the waiter goes through all these fancy words, and the homies say, just what just happened. But I think, and then he starts out, doesn't the industry start out as a bakery and then a restaurant? Because food brings people together, and that's what he's trying to do. All people of all walks of life, including the homies, to get used to people who are, come in, customers. So I just thought that was very interesting, and I like that. I come from, I belong to an Italian parish, predominantly Italian, that, later became more heterogeneous. And the priest would always say to the youngsters, like in first communion class, that company was from come and meaning together, and pane, which meant bread. So if you ate bread together, then you were part of a, it was good. It was all good. So he sprinkles that. That's almost in every chapter. There's food in every chapter. So I thought it was good.
Since you brought up food, Marie, I'll just share my favorite story. So this is me responding to explicitly to prompt 1. My favorite story from this half of the text was right at the end of chapter 6, pages 148 and 149. The account of the homie that shows up and lifts up his shirt to show that he's got a gun, and Miguel invites him for tacos, and the homie says, how about I just shoot you now? And Miguel says, so 2 tacos or 3? And, again, so there's the food that Marie's pointing us towards, that Boyle keeps coming back to. But then he makes this really, I think I might have brought this up last time, but Boyle is just an absolute master at making a turn of phrase. This is why I enjoy reading the book so much. On every page, there's an amazing turn of phrase. But on the next page, 149, Miguel answers the question, how do you say that I am? Not who do you say that I am, but how do you say that I am? And Boyle says, that's how, 2 tacos or 3. It's just a remarkable thing. I'm reading this and thinking, to the question that Boyle asks on the very last page of the text, and which I hope we can get to later in our discussion. But what do we do now? How do we answer that question? How do you say that I am? Anyway, so other thoughts, favorite stories from the text, or anything like that, other things that stuck out to folks.
Page 133. Again, he's talking about food, but he's giving us a context of early Christianity. The second full paragraph. Churches in 2nd century Rome fed 20,000 of the city's poor. That's how they see themselves, leading with their hearts, loving with their service. A Greek philosopher described Christians to Emperor Hadrian in this way: they love one another. They never fail to help widows. They save orphans from those who would hurt them. The giving. They are Christians by their love.
I loved that passage so much, Joseph, and I just that point he makes right at the end there, not a religion so much as a way of living and seeing, right? So, I mean, it's very clear how Boyle makes this like a part of his daily existence. And I mean, I read this and I'm like, well, how can I do the same thing? So thank you so much for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, and I don't have the book because I listened to it. I did the Audible, but just to piggyback on that, the phrase that he said that I loved so much that might be around that verse was when he said, instead of like, they shouldn't be leveled, but loved. And I think that I think that what Marie said was very poignant too about the food. It's always around food, but also I loved his stories about when he was with strangers, like on a plane, those stories when they all burst into laughter because of something and then they felt connected again. I got a lot out of, I think those were my favorite parts of the book too, because I as Kim said too, I'm an educator as well. And it really does. I think laughter can really bring people together. Yeah. And that love, it fosters that. So.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you're Gabriella or Julia.
I'm actually neither. I'm Angel.
Okay.
Sorry, those are two of my daughters. Well, one of my daughters and her friend who was on here earlier. Sorry.
Wait, I'm sorry, Angel. Thank you.
Angel Nowak.
With the Audible, is it Father Boyle who does the reading?
It is, and that was really neat to hear him read it. Yeah, yeah. And just as an aside too, I'm so excited because my daughter Emily is a senior at University of Scranton right now, and she's going on the trip to Homeboy Industries in March, and she's super excited. So I'm so excited to I'm going to live through her. You know, I can't wait to hear about it when she gets to meet him. So
That's great.
yeah.
If anybody has Instagram or follows the Henry New one, this week they interviewed Father Boyle on their podcast. It's a fabulous 20-25 minute. Great, about his new book about forgiving everyone, everything.
Thank you so much for that recommendation. Can add it to my list right now.
So I'd like to loop back for a second to a question that has been dogging me, and that is, and I admit upfront my ignorance, but to what extent is Boyle an outsider? To what extent is he an outlier in the Catholic Church? And to what extent is he right at the heart of Catholicism? You know, I don't know much about the practice of putting nihil obstat on a book, for instance, to show that it's free of doctrinal error. But my guess is that, you know, the Vatican would have some difficulty with some of what Boyle says. And so I'm just curious about his place in the Catholic Church.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a bishop, so I can't answer for the hierarchy, but you know, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of priests. I don't know many who would say, for example, John, what he says on page 132, like just for as one example, middle of the page. But aren't we supposed to lose our faith? It's not different from our voices changing in puberty or hair turning gray. Like snakes shedding skin, aren't we always meant to break through to something more expansive? The mystics surely teach us this. Otherwise, we just dig in our heels, get defensive, and get stuck pledging allegiance to our elementary school God. I mean, he's right. You know, theologically speaking, this goes back to what I was talking about before, about us constantly going through conversions and how the Christian life is one of pilgrimage. But it's an imagery that we don't really see in our catechism courses. You know, certainly not very often from the pulpit on a Sunday. And it's such a healthy one, right? That saying, well, no, my faith, you know, ought not be the same as it was when I was 10, right? Of course not. But it's sort of a truism that needs to be spoken more often. I would encourage all of you to watch. There's a major award that's given out every year called the Laetare Medal. University of Notre Dame bestows this upon a Catholic every year at their commencement, but they make the announcement on Laetare Sunday. Boyle won this award maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And he gets up to, you know, give his acceptance speech at the commencement. And sitting right behind him is the Bishop of South Bend, Fort Wayne, South Bend. And Boyle, the first words out of Boyle's mouth is, you know, there was a homie who told me once, you have to pepper your speech with self-defecating humor. And Boyle says, yeah, no shit. And, everybody's, going nuts laughing, and the bishop just sitting there like this. And, no laughter or anything like that. And I think that, to answer your question, John, is kind of like a microcosm for how some people in the church think about him. And yet, I think he's sort of reporting back right from the heart of Christ in a lot of ways. Not to say he's perfect. I've already shared with you some of my misgivings, but anyway, thank you for that. I'd certainly be interested in other people's thoughts about that. When I saw chapter 6, there's a lot of quote unquote unorthodox things there. Not to say that it's heresy or anything like that, but just not something you hear all that often. Marie, please. You're muted, Marie.
You mean he thinks out of the box?
He mentions that in the book, that he did so many book things and people were saying unmute. But because his emphasis is on inclusion, I think it's going to take a long time for the hierarchy to make radical changes. There are priests who will do same-sex marriages. There are priests that'll baptize anyone. I know some priests who won't. And there are some priests who won't marry if one of the spouses is Asian, for example, or Muslim, marrying a Catholic. So it all depends, but I think that he's bringing it out and pointing it out that as we move forward, the church has to move forward and to include, because right now, depending on where you live and what order it is and who the bishop is, there's exclusion. And that's he's all for inclusion. I mean, didn't he say the only thing about exclusion is that no one should be excluded, something like that in one of the chapters. So I'm going to say that just the fact that he's pointing it out is like he's traveling the road, even though he knows it's going to take a long time. This is a message that should be shared. And the more people who share it, it's going to take a while, maybe years, but we're going to get to that place.
Do you think because he's Jesuit, he has more of a landing strip than if he was part of another order? Because other Jesuits I know have said you should have a crisis of faith. You should have multiple because you should keep digging and getting deeper into this. So I like to think he's on the right team, that he's getting the support that he needs to say what he wants to say.
I think you're putting your finger right on the pulse of something really important. Like clearly he's got, I mean, whatever the bishops think about him, that's one thing, but certainly he has all the support in the world from his Jesuit superiors. I mean, on page 204, he's citing the former superior general of the order, Father Adolfo Nicolas, I mean, who, through tears is basically, he says, maybe 9 lines from the bottom of 204, this is what Eucharist is supposed to be, but rarely is. Well, when you have the superior general of your religious order saying that, you can be pretty well convinced that you're on solid footing, within your order, and you're getting a lot of support there. And I know that the current superior general visited there, last year when he was visiting the United States. So clearly he's got that support, and in a lot of ways, he probably doesn't care so much what the bishops think about him. That's my guess. I don't want to put words in his mouth. He's not here to defend himself on that, but yeah. MJ, please.
So I wonder if misapplication or the way that the church's teachings have been presented versus what the church's teachings actually are and the reasons behind them, is the reason for some of the misgivings, I guess, that he presents here. I find the church's teachings quite beautiful. And I don't think that I think there's this foregone conclusion that the Catholic hierarchy and the Catholic Church's teachings are exclusionary. I think the way that perhaps some people have applied them has been exclusionary. I think that there are priests, religious, even lay people who have been very unkind. But I think that that's separate, really, from what the church's teachings are. And if you look, most of them are very, and certainly no expert like Dan here, but deeply rooted in scriptures and deeply rooted in what Jesus himself said. For example, I often think of the woman at the well. He said to that woman, he included her. He was inclusive of her, loved her, spoke to her at a time when no, man would be caught speaking to a woman, much less a Samaritan woman, right? But he also told her about her sins. And to me, the idea of sin is that it's we have a set of teachings that are essentially a user manual for how to live our lives so that we don't find ourselves in a world of hurt. So I don't know, I just kind of wanted to offer that because I kind of feel like a lot of times I think the church's teachings get a bad rap.
Yeah, Mary Jane, I don't disagree, and I might sort of, at least in my head, split it down the middle. It's also how we execute it, though, too. I think the teachings are beautiful and supportive, and I love to see my children who attend Catholic school. Now, my oldest is at the Jesuit school down the street. I'd like to see the rules provide like the basic structure, but sometimes it's also in the delivery, in how love and how the teachings are shown. And I think Father Greg is a great vessel for that, an instrument of the church. I also want to say, like, even in referencing Father Sosa, you ask John where he fits in with the church. So, it's interesting. Father Sosa, the Superior General, isn't even the highest Jesuit in the church right now, right? Pope Francis is. So we have a Catholic church that, however many years, was it 8 years ago, said, we have an idea for the direction that we want this global church to move in. And they chose somebody who I think is much more in line with Father Greg. So where does he fit in with the church? I'd say, well, from the very, the tippy top, I'd say he fits in quite comfortably with the teachings of the church. And again, I do think it is part of the delivery. I've mentioned this before, 4 young children who are being raised in this contemporary world. And I do think we need the message to be crisp and clear and all encompassing. I think Father Greg has a great approach to it, and jumping all over the place. But yeah, I think he has a firm footing in the church. And I think the people at the tippy top, again, like Dan said, I can't speak for Pope Francis, but I think he'd be quite satisfying.
Judy, please.
I think that Jesus was on the outs. He wasn't popular, and the leaders at the time despised him, and he was crucified because he was so radical. And your example of the gospel today, that's what he did. That was his way of drawing people. He didn't criticize them for not having a Christian heart. He loved them until so much and accepted them to where they wanted to be better. That was their desire. They had the metanoia because of the love. And I think that orders all different orders, Marianists, Spiritans, certainly Jesuits, have much more time to reflect and to stand back than diocesan priests and bishops who are so caught up in running parishes and schools and fundraising. And really a lot of the judgment that I see and others have seen who are in my parish is with the diocesan priests. And as Marie said, not all of them, but there's far less judging and much more social justice action from the orders, from the different orders. And so they are not the mainstream. Pope Francis is a great example. You know, he's at the top and he's the one who says not to judge. You know, who am I to judge? And certainly in the Catholic Church, there's a division. There are those who believe in Pope Francis's way of loving, and there are those right in my parish who say, you know, he's not a pope, he's not a priest. Well, I thought we all knew that somebody who's a pope, we need to learn, and it may mean we have to come out of our comfort zone. We may have to look at ourselves and question ourselves. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you very much for that. I was just reflecting even a little bit more about Mary Jane's last comment, which has elicited a great conversation here. Yeah, I'll put my cards on the table here. I recognize I'm a huge nerd, but sometimes I watch when bishops are new bishops are installed in their dioceses, and what happens is usually at the end they'll get up and just give a brief address. And I'm forgetting which bishop this was, but a couple of years ago, a newly installed bishop got up and said, "We have good news and bad news. The good news is we have a perfect message." You know, he's talking about Jesus's message. And the bad news is you have an imperfect messenger, namely the new bishop. And I reflect on that almost every day when I go into work, you know, cognizant of the fact that we've got lots of students coming through. My office is located in the campus ministry suite of offices, and always, a lot of students coming through, and I'm fortunate enough to be with our students, you know, for many events and prayer groups that they have. And, you know, I recognize that I'm not, you know, the position of savior of the world has already been taken. You know what I mean? It's not for me to apply to that position, but, you know, trying to get closer and closer to a faithful interpretation of that message is, I don't know. I feel like in a lot of ways it's my job description. So anyway, thank you so much for bringing that point up, because it's again, there's a lot of temptations, and one temptation is to say that, you know, I am the gatekeeper, right? I've got it all figured out, or, you know, any of us could say that about whatever group of people we're with, and it's just, you know, it's good to remember, you know, what the priorities are and whose priorities they are. I definitely want to be respectful of people's time, and I don't want to shut down conversation, but maybe if we could, I would love to sort of, in a more forward-looking thing, take a look at the last prompt. And you know, you don't have to stick to this prompt, but the last prompt says, on the last page of the text, Boyle repeats the question a young girl asked her mother at a Good Friday service many years ago upon learning they were commemorating Jesus' death. What do we do now? That same question can be applied to each of us as we look ahead after completing this book. What challenges remain for the future? What part do each of us play in responding to these challenges? So I don't know if anybody has any reflections on that moving forward. Any ideas? Mary Jane, please.
I think the focus on relationship and the healing nature of relationship was just such a huge, wonderful message from this book. And, you know, we tend to put, I think, especially in our society, you know, work is always so paramount, and really kind of getting priorities in order and thinking about more about relationships.
He says that from the very first, in the introduction, Roman numeral page 17, he says we are saved by the relationship. And then I think, as you point out, the rest of the book goes right along that line. Marie, please.
Well, I was impressed by the focus on joyful tenderness. And I think it made me, I think if people were more aware of the tenderness of other human beings, of their feelings and their principles, and we would be more understanding of just events and personalities. And that would be a big step in bringing us all together so that everyone is included.
Thank you very much. Aaron, please.
Hi, yes, I was towards the end of the book, I actually went back to a paper that I wrote in my master's program on leadership, and I interviewed Father Boyle for it. I had been a JV out in LA years ago, and this was like, I don't know, quite a few years later. So I was surprised that he took my call or wanted to spend time talking to me. So I was kind of inspired to go back and look at the paper that I had written. And a lot of what he's saying here is what he said to me then. So I kind of feel like I was going through a crisis of faith at the time. I was trying to work on social justice issues and volunteering in a couple different places. And part of what I wanted to talk to him about was his leadership style, who are some of the leaders he looked up to, but then also kind of surreptitiously, you know, how can he help me with this crisis? I always feel, I was volunteering in a local jail. I just always felt like the white girl in the room. And how do you get past that and continue to really listen to people? And a lot of what he says in the book is what he said. I mean, this was more than 10 years ago that I spoke to him. And he said, just listening reverently, if you show that you value what people have to say, then they'll value what you have to say. We have a tendency to disqualify too quickly, to presume connections. I've always believed in reverence for fellow man. It was just one of the things I wrote in my paper. And it feels like so I think I'm just inspired, like, what do we do next? If he can be doing what he's been doing and treating people and listening to people this way for as long as he has, it's inspiring me to do the same.
Wow, thank you so much. I just as you were speaking there, Aaron, I was thinking about his comments about listening, and maybe I missed it, everybody. So if you found it, please feel free to correct me. But I don't recall in chapter 6 him mentioning anything about synodality. So in other words, Pope Francis is trying to make the church more synodal. He's opened up this 3 or 4 year long process of synodality, which have resulted in listening sessions, both at the parish level, diocesan level, national level, and now the whole entire church throughout the world. And it strikes me as just as you were speaking there, Aaron, that so much of what Boyle is about, which is of course relationality, as others have already mentioned, is about listening. About active listening. And as you said, I think the word you used there is reverencing other people's stories and their backgrounds and their lives, which happens through listening. Anyway, thank you. That was great. Other thoughts?
Aaron, you talked about feeling as though you were the white girl in the room. And I certainly felt that. I've been active with a group called Books to Prisoners. And one of the things that I'd been running was a movie group for female prisoners at the county jail. And it was encouraging to me that Father Boyle must be the white guy in the room all the time. So maybe we're not so far out.
Yes, I think I actually said that to him at one point because yeah, I know he was a white man in Chicago, but he's been in East LA. And I mean, I knew when I went to Mass at Dolores Mission, being tall and blonde, I stuck out like a sore thumb. So yeah, he just said, you just show up, be who you are, and show up and listen. So I've been trying to follow that advice. I've been continuing volunteering in jail, at least till the pandemic anyway.
And you certainly get the sense throughout the book that all of that dissolves in a hug.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts?
I think one of the things I'm going to do is give this book as a gift to a lot of people. We're in a community where you say Jesuit and somebody's not going to read the book because they're too liberal and they don't follow the rules. And I think the groups that have the problem are the most excluding groups, as was referred to later, delivering the message the wrong way. And I think just opening this message up and having these kind of conversations with our children, I think is super important. My father was Jesuit educated and he didn't know that he was going to die. And 2 weeks or 3 weeks before he died, he said to my children the last time he saw them, "What are you going to do to make this world a better place?" And I think those are the kinds of conversations that we should be having with more people. Instead of me getting irritated by who they might vote for, maybe I should just take the politics out of it and say things like, okay, what can we all do to make it better? Even if we have different ways of going about it.
I just want to say thanks for picking the book. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for participating and for all of you for joining us. If anybody else wants to jump in, feel free. If not, I think Ryan's going to take us home here, right?
Yeah. Wait and see if anybody wants to hop in. Well, I mean, first of all, just thank you. I mean, this has been so enriching in so many ways, but it's been a lot of fun too. I've just thoroughly enjoyed it. And special thanks to Marge for setting this up and doing all the heavy lifting. Wonderful. Thank you. And honestly, I'm just glad you all get a chance to meet Dan as well. As you can see, we are in good hands. We are blessed to have Dan as our VP of Mission and Ministry. And so let's give a little applause because it's just been a great experience. And so we can't wait to do this again in the spring. We ask you to tell your friends, see if we can continue to grow the group. We did hear from some people that were apologetic that they weren't able to make it tonight. So no, it's not, you don't have to be here every time, but we would love to see more and more people join the group. So we will gladly pick another book for the spring and hopefully we can meet up again. Feel free to send in, suggestions to Dan and myself. We'd love to hear it. So hopefully we get together for some uplifting conversations. Next, what is it? The 27th, Advent begins. And so we'll be sending out the daily Advent devotionals for the end of November and the month of December. Hopefully most of you or all of you get the devotionals, but it's just a daily reflection or a little fervorino reflection on the gospel or where we're at in the holiday season. It's usually someone can do a breakdown from the gospel or a family reflection or just sort of a daily thought. And they're a lot of fun as well to hear members of the community. It's usually faculty, staff, the Jesuits in the community, and some of the students too who write the reflections. So if you haven't signed up, an email will be going out soon. Did you say, Marge, you'll be sending something out?
Yeah, we could send an email out to the group with the link to sign up. Or you can just email me at alumni@scranton.edu and I can sign you up from there.
And what's going to be fun is, Dan, I hope I'm not stepping on your toes. But Dan was saying in the future, after Advent, he wants to send out a Monday reflection that'll go out to the whole community. So it's another way for all of us to stay connected, which will be a blast. And that's sort of my final thing, unless somebody else wants to jump in. It's great that we have this university, that we're all connected to it in some way. I like to think that a lot of what Father Greg Boyle is doing is sort of what our community builds. And these relationships, as you know, last a lifetime. We like to say that we support our students in the same ways and teach them and encourage them and foster that relationship with the community and to get outside of themselves. But really, the big secret is, not really a big secret, is that we're really doing it for ourselves too. It's reflected back on us and our lives grow, manifest as well. So we hope to continue on this journey with you in the spring, and we hope that you sign up for the reflection. So thank you so much. It was great getting to see all of you and get to know you. Thank you again to Marge, and thank you to Dan. Any final thoughts?
No, thank you both. It was a great discussion tonight.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be blessed, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.